Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of our webinar series, the Cannabis Tech Audit. I am joined again by David, Dominic, and Rachel, who have some exciting updates to the series, and I can't wait to get into it. So take it away, David.
I love the enthusiasm. Tom's like, yes, we're doing this. This one's actually a fun one because we don't have to tell you, oh, you know what? If you do the following steps, that will take you a couple of weeks. Then, things get better. This one is, hey, what can you do right now? And it's going to be important to know, like, what problem are you trying to solve? What did you get to solve that originally? Uh, things like that. But today we're going to walk through how to kind of identify those different pieces and start moving in a good direction that gives you the visibility you need. So we just start with the very beginning, a reality check. And Rach, when we were prepping for this, you had a great one talking about people coming in either just not using reports or the reasons that they don't.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've seen in cannabis, there's tends to be a kind of a graveyard of technology in cannabis, and oftentimes what we see is a lot of times people have a lot of different solutions that have overlapping areas of functionality. Frequently, what we find when we start talking to people about those softwares and so on, and the way they're using them and the reason why they still have additional needs, we'll come across reports that nobody uses. We'll come across reports that when they pull them, come back with no data or come back with data that just seems really nonsensical. It's obviously incomplete. It's obviously doesn't tie to itself in a weird way. Those types of things are generally a symptom that we see of a larger problem. The thing that we normally see is that there's features that have never been enabled in these systems. There is the data workflow underneath, the underlying data structure or data architecture that the company is using is not being reflected in this system. And as a result, these reports are coming back the way they are. And as a result, it is an underused or it is an unused area of that software.
I was told earlier this week that I had analogies for days, and so I'm going to give a bold headline here that the reality that we see so often is that cannabis operators are data rich, information poor.
Yeah.
Right. They have reports kind of in different areas of the business. By the time I'm asking somebody, did they see this number? Fundamentally, the data has shifted. And again, I think more often than not, as companies are starting to add on to their tech stack, what they're really doing is looking at ways of enriching data. And so if we think about kind of, our compliance systems as sort of that core, required piece of technology, what that system's doing is keeping me compliant as I go from seed to sale. And it does some things around category, and I have some data that supports, licenses that are, technically my customers. When I start adding layers on, what I'm really trying to do is understand the splits of, my compliance system is going to show me how much of a product value that I transferred out, but does it correctly categorize the items into the view of the world, the sales by category, subcategories that I'm looking at. So, when we see that, to Rachel's point, more often than not, really two areas of like the transactions, customers and products really get disconnected as they jump between these applications. We talk about features not being enabled. How many companies have a metric integration or an integration to their accounting system that really allows them to understand the enriched data from different applications? And I think the reality is really that most of this gets abandoned into a spreadsheet and a process to understand the world better.
Yeah. And most of the time when we talk to our customers, they have a sense that they're leaving a lot of change on the table, and they're not necessarily sure why. And when they go into a report and it doesn't make sense and it's populated with some ridiculous quantity of items that can't really report on anything, they're left scratching their head to say, is it just me, or is it the systems, or and So if we take this and say, okay, well, why does this happen? Right, starting with your examples of those reports, that data.
Yeah. So when I was saying that they have a poor data structure, um, all of these different softwares were created to solve a specific problem. In other words, there was a solution that the developer had in mind. They had a happy path of how people were going to use it and how it was going to produce the value that you saw in the demo, the value that sold you on the system to begin with. However, if the alignment of your data model underneath is not in line with the data model that the software runs off of, you're really going to start to have a hard time being able to fully use that software's functionality or get the benefit that you paid for when you onboarded that software. So a lot of times what we see is either the processes that people are completing on a day-to-day basis, like recording things in a timely fashion in real time, et cetera, or alternately, or in addition, the actual data structure themselves, like how do you define a thing? How do you define a customer? How do you define a vendor? All these different points of data is not aligned with how the system itself aligns, organizes it and therefore reports on it. And as a result, the report really is just the system of the bigger problem that you've got going on there.
Yeah, and it's crazy the number of times that we meet operators who really are struggling to distinguish between what's their process and why have they done things for so long a certain way just because of the systems that they didn't have. Right, Dom?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, right? Like the why this happens, and we think through some of the technology. Rachel does a really good job of talking about the differences between the digital world and the physical world. And there's a variety of technology and learning of technology and what the things do that maybe we don't anticipate everybody in the organization really needing to solve for. But there's just base levels as we start to think about that layer of starting again at compliance. All right, I have all of these license numbers that are associated with retail buyers. In my accounting solution, do I have the same number of retail records, or have I enriched that data? Have I said 10 of these stores are actually one buyer, and so in order for me to run my business effectively and send one invoice, accounting, I'm going to call this one buyer. And so now when I'm looking at things like my accounts receivable or days of inventory or my sell through at a customer level between my accounting and my compliance, I don't necessarily have the ability of like doing a quality assurance mechanism that says I have this many records of customers in this application. Can I match that in another? Does accounting actually know what I did differently? And to Rachel's point, a lot of times this is where we see that disconnect really starting to break down of if I have things out of my compliance system that says I have a certain amount of inventory, does my sales team also recognize that? I think going back to the reality check, how many companies do we know that either oversold inventory or overproduced and now have to discount or ran out of inventory?
Yeah, yep. Absolutely.
And the constant, hey, maybe what we need to do here is run to a new software, leaves them in that same loop every single time. They're just like, why is this happening? Well, it's because every single time you went to search for that other software, which, like Rachel said, sold you, here's the visibility you can gain, you didn't really adopt it. You didn't really bring in the right data. You're not really following your process. And so you just end up with this loop. But today is a happy day about what you could do differently. How do we get out of the loop? There's untapped potential there.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really good point. One of the very first things that you can do before you go out and spend, really, really like right now, today, before you spend another dollar, is to go into the softwares that you feel like are not providing your entire ability, like what you thought they would provide for you, or there's still a gap there, and look to see if that software does have a solution. Now, I'm not saying that solution is going to be 100% the full solution, but if you look at it and say, does it say that it can solve this? How would it solve it if it was going to do their happy path? Like how would the developers, how did they develop it? And then look at the way that your data structure is set up and see if maybe there is a way for you to reimagine your data in a way that could be better served inside of this software. I'm not saying that people need to redo all of their process, like, for example, not to record potency or something like that. But what I'm saying is small things like a software that has inventory levels where it gives you a minimum stock quantity report that could be sent out every single day. But because your team is so used to tracking weeks of inventory, it doesn't know what number to put in there as that low stock number. And so that low stock report, it has 0 as the low stock number. So you're never out of stock. And now here you've got a situation where you're not able to use it. The reason why you would do this is that this type of an analysis helps you understand how you might take better advantage, not only of the software that you have today, but also if you do find a true gap and you're looking out at other softwares, most softwares are built on very common data models, and it will allow you to better evaluate further software.
Yep.
As we're getting into this, one of the things I really love and appreciate about cannabis, and especially in the cultivation and manufacturing side, is the resourcefulness of the operators. And what I mean by that is anybody that's spent time on the, walking the floor, walking the, cultivation manufacturing, you can talk to the head of cultivation, the head of manufacturing, and see the different parts of the, again, going from seed to sale, so seed to manufacturing to sale process here. And you can see just how much in that process, without really using data, waste is reused as a quality mechanism. The perfect example I'd give here is, let's say, I have a distillate concentrate, but I'm also selling premium flower, and I can't get the result that I want out of a certain premium flower. Well, I don't want to just get rid of that flower. I have the ability within my product catalog to divert that product that didn't maybe pass my standards for what premium are, and put that to a different, finished good. And so knowing that we do this already as cannabis operators, as we've started to think about this, there's a reframe of the technology or the data inputs, right? Where we can really almost reframe it back to the seed to sale. Every time that I go in and enter in an item into Metric, I'm creating the seed of a new data that can be refined as this really output. And if I think about some of these things, right, like let's say, reorders or sell through, a lot of times we see operators that want to jump to a market analytics tool or another tool that's going to really give them visibility into what's selling at retail. Already out of my transfer data, I have items and categories and this pattern where if I analyze the existing buyers and license types in here, I can actually use base level Excel, Google Sheets to look at that data to see how often is this buyer repeating an order. As they're repeating an order, are they buying more frequently of a certain category? And that's just using my metric data. And as we start to think about this value chain, right, have a specialist that really looks at that data, that output of the data that's saying, hey, we maybe have this average interval now coming from our metric data that says these categories and these buyers are starting to buy all the time. When I add my second layer on it and enrich it, well, now maybe I'm getting better categorization of my data, right? Did I take from my source application now, and can I take it to my next application and say, hey, that same pattern, we've now just enriched it. We're instead of having 4 categories in a metric that we report on, we have 10 that we actually sell through.
Yeah.
And I take my customer data that I've sold all my products to and align that with my accounting data and say, hey, now that I've sold all of these, how much do I need to collect out of these? And do I have the same number of customer records? And can I use my AR trends where I've either organized now and said, hey, these 10 stores are this one buyer? Can I look at that trend that's now tying to the wholesale orders to look, hey, this customer orders every 15 days. But, this one store in their stack, they pay 30 days late every time, right? So now I'm shifting my attention over to the problem within my business rather than adding on another AR solution, adding on another VMI solution that maybe, to Rachel's point, I didn't quite understand how the first application worked. And so maybe I really only need to look at my sales values, sales by category, by product, in this recurring pattern to check sell through versus adding for another premium tool offering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's so awesome about that is that so spreadsheets get a pretty bad rap. Anybody comes into an organization, the number of spreadsheets they have, they say, okay, well, you guys definitely need to mature a little bit. But, honestly, for right now, just you're at where you're at. And if you can take that kind of like just raw source data that pretty much everybody's going to have, you're going to not only gain that visibility, like I love that phrase, enriching the data. You're not just going to gain the visibility that you really can't get in a systematic way, but also that exercise of, like you said, if you're going to now link that transfer, that movement activity to your financial records, you'll start appreciating it, what it means to relate all of this information across these multiple systems, a regulatory system, an inventory system, a financial system. And so to Rachel's point, when you go looking for something that now does what you actually need, you have real requirements because you've really gone down that path. And there's one last one. If you find yourself reworking your data every single time that you do that exercise, Dom, that you're talking about, clearly, to Rachel's point, you're really not approaching your data in the way that is standardized because you're having to rework it every time. So if we're thinking about like what are the tools out there that let us start this, use what we have, what are you guys thinking?
Yeah, I think that it's really important. What you guys just said was exactly what I was thinking, which is that the the underlying data structure that you need for your business, you'll start to see this emerging. So to Dom, to your example in your use case, where you're saying you have a certain number of categories in metric because those are the ones that metric allows, because that's from a regulatory perspective, the number of categories. But then in your order management platform, you actually have way more categories than that. So for example, you have edibles inside of metric, but inside of your order management, you've got chocolates, you've got gummies, you've got fruit chews. You know, there's more granularity there. But the thing is that these should all align to each other. So all of those categories in that order management should level up into the categories inside of metric. It shouldn't be that half of one of them inside of your order management goes to one metric category and half goes to another metric category. So as you start to do this, you can start to create a consistent, solidified data model for your business as a whole that can cross all of your platforms, which means that you're not reinventing the data that goes in on every platform that you bring on. This means that then the information in one system can be better used by the system itself, better provided the reporting and the other functionality that you wanted, as well as be able to be compared to other systems in a more meaningful way without a lot of rework and a lot of massaging of the data. And to your point, David, then if you're looking at a new solution, you have a data model that you can then apply to that new solution to better be able to use the new solution or to have the requirements for the new solution. Additionally, you may find that you're actually paying for 2 or 3 softwares to do the exact same thing, not realizing that that's what you were doing. Right? And you can now, narrow down some of the softwares that you're actually paying for.
Yeah. And Rach, like, as you're thinking, well, I'm starting to define my master data. I think you'd probably also start realizing it's going to depend on which system that I use, how I approach that data definition, right? In different systems.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have different focuses in different systems, but I think that the idea of what a customer is what a customer is. So if in metric you've got 5 different licenses, but those all link to one entity customer that pays the bill for all 5 of those licenses inside of your financial software, it's just the reverse of what you saw with the categories in metric and the categories inside of your order management. It's the same thing. In other words, all of this relates to each other and you know what the relationship is.
Yeah. And your items and your locations, all of that starts to get some visibility, some clarity. And then when you go to those systems, you can kind of tailor it in. But yeah, so if we then say, okay, well, let's figure out where do we start? Like there's a bunch of different spots, but Dom, I think that like in one of our prep calls, you said like you've got these operators who know what they're doing, and if you give them the space to approach this, like I think you said like a scientist or something like that. Like, talk about that curiosity.
Yeah, like I mean, I think the example I gave was talking about the, what we all learn in, middle school as the scientific process, right? Can I run
Hmm.
a test on something and, based off the filters or the variables that I've tested this under, does the same result exist in my next one?
Yeah.
As we're talking about this seed to sale and like the seed of data inputs, and then how to analyze the call it finished good outputs of data. Um,
Hmm.
you know, I think it's interesting that most operations will identify head of cultivation, head of manufacturing, head of you have all these experts that maybe use a different version of the application. But there's that middle layer that what's interesting is like when it comes to the data, we almost forget to use that process, right? So manufacturing is doing quality assurance against buds that are coming in, cultivation is doing quality assurance against buds that are coming into the manufacturing cycle. What data are we using to support the performance of that as it starts to go through?
Yeah.
And so, how to unlock them, right? Like, hey, maybe we're bringing, this first report, this first pass, and we're encouraging, hey, this is a first step on this scientific process for us just to test. Did we get the result of looking at the output from metric, finished goods? And did I get to my, manufacturing run and my work orders or into my inventory management system? And did I get the same number of inputs, right? Did the output from one application start to manage? As we're thinking about these digital and physical workflows, it's sort of like experimenting through, right? If I change something in another application, did the
Hmm.
result still live in another? And again, as we're kind of talking about, maybe like as Rachel said, customers are customers. It is this ability to go through and say, do I have 150 customers in this one? Do I have one here? But using the data as a way of helping drive decisions. We had
Yeah.
a customer recently that knew all of the strains that they produce and what brands they were assigned to when they came in at the seed orientation. They told us very confidently they had about 120 of these. We used the data and we shared back with them and said, hey, looking at the output from your source application, you actually have 330, right? And as
Hmm.
soon as they looked at it, they said, oh, I know where these are at. They went through and very quickly were able to associate different brands, right? And so bringing data to these discussions is huge. And really, again, it's that curiosity of like, hey, we're learning more about the system through the lens of the data that we're bringing to it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's how you can learn why a feature exists before you decide you do or don't need it. You may think you don't need a feature because you simply cannot see an application for it. But as you do this experimentation that you're seeing, all of a sudden you start to realize, oh, that's a really good reason for that field to exist. And then as a result, the report runs off of it. So when you're looking at the feature sets inside of these softwares, having a really good understanding of why it was developed the way it was. And as you do those experiments, then going back to see how you can now better enhance, to your point, enhance the use of their systems by enhancing the amount of data that's being created inside of them in a way that a benefit to your company, an asset for your company.
You hit the nail on the head there too, Rach. It's where we started this conversation. That was around some of the reports being unused. As we had
Yeah.
like this key on here, so in most cases, a report being unused is the greatest insight back to why
Yeah.
certain enriched data fields exist. We see it all the time where the SKU field in my order management system is filled in as a copy and paste reference to my metric package tag. Well,
Yeah.
why did I do that? Another field that I call SKU. And so using a product report, an inventory report, actually allows me to see what the output of that data is. And maybe
Yep.
as I'm starting to analyze that output, I can realize like, hey, maybe I'm using SKU incorrectly here. Maybe there's an integration that will join my order management to my compliance application that will pull the package tag into its own field here. And now I can
Yeah.
reuse the SKU field to actually think about the 60 SKUs that I manage instead of the 330.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That will
And to the
feel
point,
like such a
sorry.
relief to get
Yeah.
that kind of visibility. It'll be huge. And well, go ahead, Rich. I had one other thought on
Well,
that, choosing a feature, how you use it.
yeah. So to that point, if you're also finding yourself using a lot of spreadsheets, what we oftentimes see how happens in spreadsheets is they actually have a huge amount of information all put into one sheet. And what you might find is that a portion of the information in your massive spreadsheets that you've been creating is being reported on inside of this system. And so you might see that there are actually ways to break down some of your really massive spreadsheets into coherent portions and pieces, or even phases and steps, that then will allow people to take ownership of the part that is theirs, use the system to its fullness, so they're not having to go and double enter into the system and then enter into the spreadsheet, and still be able to get the totality of visibility that the spreadsheet gave you by pulling the report itself out of the system and aligning it with the other ones, because your data model is now in alignment with your organization.
Yeah, if you get the chance to work with any of your BIs, you get to just do modeling, which really feels nice and it's helpful. And interestingly enough, if you want to figure out how to split out that information, look at some of the standard systems that you might want to use. They probably, to Rachel's point, are built on that related database approach to things, based on what those roles are. Dom, you mentioned, hey, on occasion we should really consider, hey, what are the features that we are using and what we need? And I'd call out one thing from process. Look at your RACI and reach out to those who should be consulted, because you might be really surprised at who uses the data that comes out of that feature and even how they use it. They might not use it right. But you might actually learn a lot, and that then guides you to say, hey, what visibility do we actually need and why? So we find ourselves at a call to action here. What can we do? And kind of what do we do first? Dom, I think you're a great one to start on this, because you tend to get asked that question already on a weekly basis.
Yeah, look, you're going back to this, like, again, part of the reason why CannaHub exists is really like the goal of data, right? The objectivity that data can provide into the lens of your business. And one of the core metrics that I think most operators should be asking themselves is really around asset utilization. And asset utilization is really, if I'm going to spend something, if I'm going to spend $1 of investment on tech or people or process, what's the value that I'm going to get out of it? What's the return on that asset of dollar in? Does it contribute $1 of sales back to what I have? And that's a harder question to ask, but a lot of times really, again, you have operators are in technology, or in the data sets, are in spreadsheets daily, hourly, monthly. And so a lot of times, again, with the rise of a lot of the AI technologies that we've had, more and more we see customers that are just taking raw exports and connecting it to AI to ask some of these base level questions. You can go into metric on a transfers output and see landed value, customer, vendor, and what items and categories you sold. And so asking simple questions around, hey, how often does this one license type buy for me? What were the metric items? Great. Maybe now I want to pull in my LeafLink data set. Say, hey, does this data field exist anywhere else? And again, as you start to go through that lens of looking at report outputs of how the application works, how I'm actually entering in the C's of my finished goods application, I think you really start to see, am I using it as intended, right? Like I have orders, products, customers. Am I using the customer objects in my applications as, ways of tracking sales performance? And again, as we start to think, integrations are great. Integrations are really great to start and streamline entering multiple data into different applications. But a lot of times if I don't understand that, right, I all of a sudden am looking at gaps in my data. So, again, we have it right on the slide here. What are we actually trying to solve, right? And a lot of times it's just surface the insight from the trend of the data that we have available.
And the other thing too is around your, and I always end up going back to an SOP at some point, but again, it's around your SOP. So for example, it might be that the data is being created in there, but if it's not being created in a timely fashion, so there's more to it than just the what, there's also the when. There's the how, there's the why, but there's also the when. If data is not being created until 24 or 48 hours later by a group, and there's a group that needs that data in real time, or the API needs the data in real time to feed into another application, then you are going to find that you're working against yourself. And so it's really great to be able to take a look at some of these nuances and details of how you're using the system, what you're not getting out of it, what it's intended to solve, in order to make sure that you've exhausted the full use of that already
Mhm.
paid for solution before you start going out and pricing another one, because the cost of a new system is not just the cost of that software or just the cost of the subscription or the user profiles or whatever. It's also the cost of implementation. It's the cost of transition. It's adding in yet one more place for information to be stored and now collated from. And so it is a much bigger conversation that we're getting into when we talk about buying. And again, by doing this exercise, then you'll also know better the next time you buy.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Excellent points, all. Josh, when's our next webinar?
Thank you so much, David. This has been another excellent example of what you can do, and what we're going to lead into next month on our 7th edition is called Back Office Bottlenecks, Why Your Admin Workload is Ballooning. This session will explore how system fragmentation and unstructured handoffs create costly admin overload, learn how to reduce back office friction, reclaim time, and build the flow across tools and teams. That will be on August 19th at the same time. So please tune in, scan the QR code below to register today. We look forward to seeing you again very soon.